The corridors of the Imperial Academy station buzzed with the usual chaos of another school day. Hundreds of young beings from across the Galactic Empire moved between classes, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have been impossible to imagine just centuries ago. Four-armed Zeltharians chatted in their musical language, while crystalline Valdorians clinked softly as they walked. The floating gas-bag Newmans drifted overhead, occasionally bumping into the tall, spider-like arachnoids who scuttled along the ceiling walkways. But in the middle of this diverse crowd, one figure stood out for all the wrong reasons. Maya Chen walked with her head down, clutching her data pad close to her chest. At 12 years old, she was small even by human standards. Her black hair tied back in a simple ponytail and her brown eyes focused on the floor. She wore the standard academy uniform, but somehow it looked different on her tiny frame. Where other students wore their uniforms with pride, Maya seemed to be trying to disappear inside hers. The problem wasn't that she was human. There were other humans at the academy, though not many. The problem was that Maya was different in ways that made her an easy target for the Empire's more aggressive young citizens. "Look, it's the little human pet," came a sneering voice from behind her. Maya's shoulders tensed, but she kept walking. She had learned that responding only made things worse. "I heard humans can't even fly their own ships anymore," said another voice. This one belonged to Zix, a young Drakmarian whose species looked like walking lizards with too many teeth. "They have to use artificial intelligence for everything because their tiny brains can't handle real technology." A few other students laughed. Maya quickened her pace, but her short legs couldn't match the longer strides of her tormentors. "Where are you going, little monkey?" Zix called out, using the derogatory term that some aliens used for humans. "Don't you want to play with us?" Maya turned a corner, hoping to lose them in the maze of corridors, but found herself facing a dead end. The viewing port at the end of the hallway showed the vast expanse of space, with distant stars twinkling like tiny diamonds. For a moment she wished she could just float out there among them, far away from all of this. "Trapped," laughed Thyra, a Zeltharian girl whose forearms made her particularly effective at blocking escape routes. Just like humans always are when they try to fight real challenges. Maya finally turned around, her back pressed against the cool metal wall. 6 students faced her, representing 4 different species, all of them bigger and stronger than she was. They formed a semicircle around her, their eyes gleaming with the cruel pleasure that young bullies seem to find in every corner of the galaxy. "What's wrong with you humans anyway?" asked Vorth, a Newman whose gas-filled body bobbed slightly as he spoke. "Your species is so weak that you need machines to do everything. You can't breathe in most atmospheres, you can't survive in space, you can't even defend yourselves properly. Maybe that's why the Empire only lets a few of you into the academy," Thera added, "as a charity case." Maya's hands clenched into small fists at her sides. She had heard variations of these insults countless times before, but they still stung. It was true that humans were physically weaker than most galactic species. It was true that they needed environmental suits and life support systems to survive in most places. And it was true that there were very few humans in the prestigious Imperial Academy. "I heard," said Zix, leaning closer with a grin that showed far too many sharp teeth, "that humans used to think they were special. Back when they were stuck on their little planet, they thought they were the only intelligent life in the universe." "How embarrassing," laughed Vorth. "Imagine being that ignorant. And now look at them." Thyra gestured at Maya with one of her 4 hands. Barely above pet status in the real galaxy, Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks. She knew she should stay quiet, should wait for them to get bored and leave her alone. That's what the school counselors always advised. But something about their casual dismissal of her entire species made her anger flare. "We're not pets," she said quietly. "What did you say?" Zix cupped a clawed hand around his ear hole. "I don't think we heard you, little monkey." "I said we're not pets," Maya repeated, louder this time. The group burst into laughter. "Oh, it has opinions." Thyra clapped her 4 hands together in mock applause. "How cute. The little human thinks its species matters." "Tell us then," said Vorth, floating lower so his gas bag body was at Maya's eye level. "What exactly do humans contribute to the Empire? What makes you worth keeping around?" Maya opened her mouth but found she didn't have a good answer. Humans were miners and farmers and small-scale traders. They filled minor roles in the vast imperial bureaucracy. They were useful but not essential, not like the Drakmarians with their military prowess, or the Valdorians with their computing abilities. are the Newmans with their spaceflight capabilities. That's what I thought, Zix said with satisfaction. Face it, little monkey. Your species is only here because the Empire feels sorry for you. At least we're not just zoo animals, added another student, a crystalline whose faceted body caught the light from the viewport, though I suppose that might be next. Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes, which only made her angrier. She hated crying in front of them. It just proved their point about human weakness. Look, it's leaking. Thyra pointed at Maya's face. Do all humans leak when they're sad? Maybe it's broken, suggested Vorth. Should we call maintenance? The laughter got louder and crueler. Maya pressed herself harder against the wall, wishing she could just disappear. This was supposed to be the best school in the galaxy, a place where young beings learned to work together for the betterment of the Empire. Instead, it felt like a prison where being different meant being a target. But as the group continued their taunting, none of them noticed the small crowd that was starting to gather at the other end of the corridor. Other students were stopping to watch, some looking uncomfortable with what they were seeing, and none of them had any idea that this seemingly insignificant confrontation was about to change everything. The crowd at the end of the corridor grew larger as more students stopped to watch the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed entertained by the spectacle. A few even pulled out their personal recording devices, as if this was just another amusing incident to share later. Zix noticed the growing audience and seemed energized by it. His scaly chest puffed out with pride as he realized how many beings were watching him dominate the small human. Everyone should see this, he announced loudly. This is what happens when inferior species try to compete with their betters. Maya's breathing became rapid and shallow. The circle of tormentors seemed to be closing in, and the weight of all those watching eyes made everything worse. She could hear whispers and comments from the crowd in a dozen different languages, but none of them sounded like they were coming to her defense. You know what I think? Thyra said, her forearms crossed in front of her. I think humans shouldn't be allowed in advanced classes at all. They just slow everyone else down. Agreed, nodded Vorth, his gas-filled body bobbing with the movement. My cousin is in Maya's quantum mechanics class, and he says she asks the most basic questions. Things that any decent species would understand instinctively. This wasn't entirely fair. Maya did struggle with some of the advanced concepts, but that was because human education hadn't prepared her for the kind of multidimensional thinking that came naturally to species like the Newmans. She was actually doing better than most humans ever had in such courses. But that didn't matter to her classmates. Maybe we should test her, suggested the crystalline student, whose name was Shard. Light refracted through his faceted body as he spoke, creating dancing patterns on the walls. See if she can solve a simple problem that any real Academy student should handle easily. Great idea. Zix's eyes gleamed with malicious joy. Maya, here's an easy one for you. Calculate the hyperspace jump coordinates needed to reach the outer rim from here, taking into account the gravitational interference from 3 star systems. Maya stared at him. That wasn't an easy problem at all. It was the kind of calculation that even senior students struggled with, and it required knowledge of mathematical concepts that most species learn naturally, but humans had to study for years to understand. I don't know how to do that, she admitted quietly. Of course you don't, Zix laughed triumphantly. Because humans are too stupid for real galactic education. Try something even simpler, suggested Thyra. Maya, what's the standard procedure for establishing communication with a hostile alien vessel? Again, this was far from simple. It involved complex diplomatic protocols, knowledge of hundreds of different communication methods, and the ability to think quickly under pressure. Maya had studied these procedures, but she was 12 years old and had never encountered a real hostile vessel. I'm not sure, she said. Not sure, Vorth exclaimed, floating higher with excitement. She's not sure about basic safety protocols. How did something this ignorant even get into the Academy? The crowd was getting larger now, and Maya could hear more laughter from the audience. Some students were recording everything, probably planning to share it across the Academy's social networks. By tomorrow, everyone would know about the stupid human girl who couldn't answer simple questions. But then, unexpectedly, a new voice cut through the noise. Those aren't simple questions. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. Standing at the edge of the crowd was Kale, a Drekmarian student who was 2 years older than Maya. Unlike Zix, who was still young and relatively small, Kale was nearly full-grown. His scales had the deep green coloration that marked him as coming from a military family, and his bearing suggested someone who was used to being obeyed. "What did you say?" Zix asked, suddenly less confident. "I said those aren't simple questions," Kale repeated, walking slowly toward the group. The crowd parted to let him through. "Hyperspace navigation and hostile contact protocols? Those are advanced senior-level topics. You're testing a second-year student on material that most fourth-years struggle with." "She's human," Zix protested. "She should be held to higher standards if she wants to be here." "Why?" Kale's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Is there something in the Academy charter that says humans need to outperform everyone else just to earn their place?" Zix looked around nervously. Some of the other bullies were backing away slightly. Kale came from one of the more prominent military families in the Empire, and his opinion carried weight even among students. "It's just, everyone knows humans are—" Zix struggled to find the right words. "Everyone knows humans are what?" Kale stepped closer, and now he towered over the younger Drakmarian. "Weak, stupid? Unable to compete?" "Yes," Thyra interjected, trying to support her friend. "Exactly. They're inferior in every way that matters." Kale turned his attention to her, and his expression grew even more serious. "Inferior in what ways?" "Physical strength? Many species are stronger than Drakmarians too. Should we exclude everyone who can't lift as much as an arachnoid?" "That's different," Thyra protested. "Humans are just... they're not like us. They're primitive." "Primitive," Kale repeated thoughtfully. He looked at Maya, who was still pressed against the wall, watching this unexpected defense with wide eyes. "Tell me, Maya, how long has your species been part of the Galactic Empire?" Maya was surprised to be asked a direct question, especially one that didn't seem designed to humiliate her. About 50 years, I think." 50 years, Kale nodded. "And in that time, how many major conflicts has the Empire been involved in?" 3, Maya answered, remembering her history lessons. "And did humans participate in those conflicts?" "Yes," Maya said more confidently. "Human engineers helped design the new shield systems, and human negotiators were part of the diplomatic corps that ended the Outer Rim War." "Interesting," Kyle mused. "So in just 50 years, a primitive species managed to contribute to Imperial military technology and diplomacy. How exactly does that make them inferior?" Zix was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Look, that's not the point. The point is that she doesn't belong here. Humans don't belong here." "Based on what criteria?" Kale's voice was getting colder. "Academic performance? Maya is passing all her classes. Physical capability? The Academy isn't a military boot camp. Species diversity? The Empire is built on cooperation between different peoples." "You don't understand," Vorth interjected, his gas bag body pulsing with agitation. "Humans are just... they're not important. They're nobody special." Kale's expression changed subtly, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Nobody special? Is that what you think?" There was something in his tone that made the entire crowd go quiet. Even the students who had been recording stopped their devices, sensing that the mood had shifted in a way they didn't quite understand. "Maya," Kale said quietly, "what's your last name?" The question seemed odd and out of place. Maya blinked in confusion. "Chen, Maya Chen. And your father's name?" "David Chen," Maya answered automatically, not understanding why this mattered. Kale went very still. Around them, the crowd seemed to sense that something significant was happening, though most didn't understand what. "David Chen," Kyle repeated slowly. His voice had become very quiet, but it carried clearly through the silent corridor. "The David Chen?" Maya looked puzzled. Yes? He's my father." The color drained from Kale's scales, shifting from deep green to a pale yellow-white that indicated shock among his species. He stared at Maya as if seeing her for the first time. And in that moment of stunned silence, none of the bullies understood that their casual torment of a seemingly insignificant human child had just become the biggest mistake of their young lives. The silence stretched across the corridor like a physical thing. Kale continued to stare at Maya with an expression that had shifted from protectiveness to something approaching awe. The bullies looked back and forth between them, confused by this sudden change in atmosphere. "What's the big deal?" Zix finally asked, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "So her father has a name." "All fathers have names," Kale didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be processing something enormous. his scaled features working through calculations or memories that the others couldn't see. "Kyle," Thyra ventured.
What's wrong?
"You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Kyle said quietly, his voice hollow. "Something much more real than that." Maya was growing increasingly uncomfortable with being the center of attention. She had no idea why her father's name had caused such a reaction. David Chen was just her dad, a quiet man who worked long hours at something he never talked much about, who helped her with homework when he was home, and who always seemed tired but tried to smile when she was around. "I don't understand," Maya said. "What's special about my father?" Kyle looked at her with an expression that mixed disbelief with something that might have been pity. "Maya, what does your father do for work?" "He works for the government," Maya replied, which was the standard answer she had been taught to give. "Something with security." "Something with security," Kale repeated flatly. "Maya, do you know what the Special Operations Division is?" Maya shook her head. She had never heard the term before. "It's the Empire's most elite military unit," Kale explained, his voice still carrying that strange, hollow quality. "They handle situations that are too dangerous or too sensitive for regular forces. Rescue missions in hostile territory, infiltration of enemy strongholds, elimination of threats that could destabilize entire sectors." "Okay," Maya said slowly, not understanding where this was going. "But what does that have to do with my father?" Around them, the crowd was growing restless. Some students were starting to drift away, bored by what seemed like a strange conversation about military units. But others remained, sensing that something important was happening even if they didn't understand what. Zix was getting impatient with the mysterious turn the conversation had taken. "Look, we don't care about some random military unit. We were talking about how humans don't belong here. And you're getting distracted by David Chen," Kale interrupted. Speaking directly to Maya and ignoring Zix completely, "is the commanding officer of the Special Operations Division." Maya blinked. "No, he's not." "Yes," Kale said firmly. "He is." "But that's impossible," Maya protested. "My dad is he's just my dad. He's not some important military person. He makes terrible jokes and falls asleep watching old Earth movies and always forgets to put his dishes in the washer." "The David Chen I'm thinking of," Kale continued, "would be about 45 years old, born on Earth with black hair and brown eyes. He would have a scar on his left hand from an old injury, and he would probably seem very ordinary when he's at home, because that's what people like him are trained to do." Maya's mouth fell open. The description was perfectly accurate, including the scar that her father claimed came from an accident at work years before she was born. "But he can't be," she whispered. He's just my dad." "Your dad," Kyle said gently, "is the most dangerous individual in the known galaxy." The bullies were starting to look nervous now, though they didn't fully understand why. Even Zix seemed to sense that the dynamic had shifted in some fundamental way. "You're making this up," Thyra said, but her forearms were crossed defensively across her chest. "You're trying to scare us with some story about Maya's father being some kind of super soldier." "I'm not making anything up," Kale replied. "David Chen's reputation precedes him throughout the Empire. Every military family knows the stories." "What stories?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale looked around at the crowd, then back at Maya. 3 years ago, when the Helix Syndicate kidnapped the Valdorian ambassador's family, who do you think got them back?" Maya shook her head. "The Syndicate had them on a space station in the Dead Zone, protected by automated defenses and a crew of 200 mercenaries. The regular military said it was impossible to assault directly. Too many defenses, too many hostages at risk. So they sent one person." "One person?" Vorth scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Nobody could take on 200 defenders alone." "David Chen did," Kale said simply. "He infiltrated the station, disabled their defenses, neutralized the entire crew, and extracted all 4 hostages without a single casualty among the prisoners." The corridor had gone completely quiet again. Even the students who had been losing interest were now listening intently. "That's just a story," Zix said, but his voice wavered. "Military propaganda to make the Empire look stronger than it is." "Is it?" Kale asked. "Maya, does your father ever have nightmares?" Maya nodded slowly. She had heard her father cry out in his sleep sometimes, usually in languages she didn't recognize. Her mother always said it was just stress from work. "Does he sometimes seem to hear things that aren't there? or react to movements in his peripheral vision that turn out to be nothing. Again, Maya nodded. Her father was always alert, always scanning their surroundings even when they were doing something as simple as walking through a shopping district. Those are signs of someone who has seen real combat, Kyle explained. Someone who has been in situations where a moment's inattention could mean death. But he's so gentle, Maya protested. He wouldn't hurt anyone. He helps me with my science projects and reads me stories and… Of course he does, Kyle said softly. He loves you. That's what makes someone like him so dangerous to his enemies. He has something to protect. Thyra was backing away now, her forearms trembling slightly. This is crazy. You're saying that Maya's father is some kind of legendary warrior? Look at her. She can't even defend herself against us. That's because she's 12 years old and has been raised in peacetime, Kale replied. But genetics don't lie, and training can overcome almost anything. Genetics? Maya asked. Physical reflexes, pattern recognition, spatial intelligence, stress tolerance under pressure, Kale listed. All heritable traits. All things that your father would have in abundance. He paused and looked directly at each of the bullies in turn. And all things that, with proper training, you would inherit too. The implication hung in the air like a threat. Maya might be small and young and unprepared, but she was also the daughter of the most elite soldier in the Empire, and if even half of what Kale was saying was true, then the genetic potential was there, waiting to be awakened. Zix was the first to break. This is stupid, he declared, but he was already backing toward the exit. Come on, guys. Let's get out of here. But as the group started to disperse, none of them realized that they had made a critical error. In their rush to escape the uncomfortable implications of Maya's parentage, they had forgotten one crucial detail. They had been recording everything. As the bullies hurried away, their recording devices still clutched in their hands, Maya found herself alone in the corridor with Kale and a handful of remaining students who seemed too stunned to leave. The weight of what she had just learned pressed down on her like a physical force. This can't be real, she said, looking up at Kale with desperate eyes. My father makes pancakes on Sunday mornings. He forgets where he puts his reading glasses. He can't even figure out how to program the entertainment system properly. Kale's expression softened with something like sympathy. Maya, the most dangerous people in the galaxy are often the ones who seem the most normal. It's a survival mechanism. Your father has probably spent years learning how to blend in, how to seem harmless and ordinary. But why wouldn't he tell me? Maya's voice cracked slightly. Why keep it secret? To protect you, Kale said simply. If people knew who you were, who your father really was, you would never have a normal life. You would be a target for his enemies, a weapon to be used against him or a symbol for others to either worship or destroy. Maya slumped against the wall, overwhelmed. So everything I thought I knew about my family is wrong? Not wrong, Kale corrected. Incomplete. Your father is exactly the person you know him to be when he's with you. But he's also someone else when he needs to be. One of the remaining students, a young Valdorian whose crystalline structure glowed with nervous energy, stepped forward hesitantly. Excuse me, she said in a voice like wind chimes. But are you certain about this identification? David Chen is not an uncommon name among humans. Kale nodded gravely. I'm certain. My father serves on the Imperial Military Council. David Chen's reputation is well known among the senior officer corps, even if his exact activities are classified. There's only one David Chen who would cause that kind of reaction when his name is mentioned in military circles. What kind of reaction? Maya asked. Respect, Kale said. Fear, awe. Your father is the person they call when everything else has failed. When a situation is so dangerous or so impossible that no one else can handle it, they send David Chen. The Valdorian student's crystalline form was pulsing with different colors now, indicating deep thought. If this is true, then the recording… What recordings? Maya asked, confused. Kale's expression went dark. Zix and his friends were recording your confrontation. Standard bullying behavior. They like to share their victories, but now those recordings show them tormenting the daughter of David Chen. So, Maya still didn't understand the implications. So, Kale explained patiently, those recordings will spread through the Academy's social networks within hours. By tomorrow, every student will know who you are. Within a week, it will reach the wider Empire networks. And eventually, Maya prompted. Eventually, your father will find out that his daughter is being bullied at school. and that the evidence of it is being broadcast across the galaxy for entertainment. The corridor suddenly felt very cold. Maya had never seen her father truly angry, but she had sometimes caught glimpses of something dark and dangerous in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. The idea of that look being directed at someone who had hurt her was terrifying. He's not violent at home, Maya said weakly. Of course not, Kyle agreed. But your father has dedicated his life to protecting the innocent and eliminating threats to Imperial security. How do you think he would classify people who harm his child? The Valdorian student was now glowing with what Maya recognized as fear among her species. This could become a diplomatic incident, she said in her chiming voice. If Commander Chen takes direct action against Imperial citizens, even in defense of his daughter, it won't be direct action, Kale said grimly. It will be much worse than that. What do you mean? Maya asked. Your father doesn't work alone, Kale explained. The Special Operations Division has resources throughout the Empire. Intelligence networks, surveillance systems, contacts in every major organization. If David Chen wants to know something about someone, he can find out their entire life history within hours. Maya was beginning to understand the scope of what was happening. You mean he'll investigate them? Investigation will be just the beginning, Kale said. Think about it logically. Your father's job is to protect Imperial interests from threats both external and internal. Now he discovers that his daughter, an innocent child, is being systematically tormented by other Imperial citizens who believe humans are inferior and don't belong in the Empire. That sounds like a threat to Imperial unity, the Valdorian observed. Exactly, Kale nodded. And threats to Imperial unity fall directly under the Special Operations Division's mandate. Maya felt sick. You're saying my father will treat this as a military operation? I'm saying your father will treat this as what it is, Kyle corrected. A symptom of a larger problem. Species-based discrimination within Imperial institutions threatens the stability of the entire government. If it's happening here at the Academy, it's happening elsewhere too. The implications were staggering. Maya had thought this was just a personal problem, just a few mean kids making her life difficult, but Kale was suggesting it could be seen as something much larger, a threat to the fundamental principles that held the Galactic Empire together. But they're just children, Maya protested. They're just being stupid and mean like kids always are. Are they? Kale asked pointedly. Or are they expressing attitudes they learned from their families, from their communities, from the broader culture of their home worlds? Maya didn't have an answer for that. Maya, Kale continued gently, your father has probably spent his entire career fighting external threats to the Empire. Wars, terrorism, hostile alien species trying to destabilize Imperial space. But internal threats, discrimination, prejudice, the kind of thinking that says some Imperial citizens are worth less than others, those might be even more dangerous in the long run. Because they come from within, the Valdorian added, her crystalline form now glowing with understanding. They can't be defeated with military force alone. Right, Kyle agreed. They require a different kind of response, a more comprehensive one. Maya looked back and forth between them, feeling like she was missing something important. What kind of response? Kale was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Maya shiver. The kind that makes sure this never happens to anyone else's child. Ever again? In the distance, Maya could hear the sound of students moving through the corridors, going about their normal school day. But something had changed fundamentally in the last few minutes. The normal world seemed suddenly fragile, like it was balanced on the edge of a precipice that she hadn't even known existed. And somewhere in the vast complexity of the Imperial government, a recording of her humiliation was beginning, its journey through networks and systems that would eventually bring it to the attention of the one person in the galaxy who had both the power and the motivation to respond to it, her father. 3 hours later, the recording had already been shared 47 times across the Academy's internal network. Students gathered in groups around viewing devices, watching the confrontation with a mixture of entertainment and growing unease as word spread about who Maya's father really was. In the Advanced Tactical Studies classroom, a group of senior military students watched the recording with expressions of disbelief and dawning horror. Turn it off, said Commander Vex, a Drakmarian instructor whose scales bore the deep scarring that marked him as a combat veteran, but his students were too transfixed to obey immediately. Is it really him? asked one of the students, a young arachnoid whose multiple eyes were fixed on the small figure of Maya pressed against the corridor wall. David Chen's daughter? It's her, confirmed another student. This one a Newman whose gas-filled body was pulsing with agitation. I ran a genetic comparison using the Academy's database. Maya Chen, age 12, father listed as David Chen, occupation classified. Commander Vex finally reached over and shut off the viewing device himself. That's enough, he said firmly. This recording should never have been made, and it certainly shouldn't be circulating like entertainment. But sir, protested the arachnoid student, doesn't this prove that humans really are weak? Look how easily they dominated her. She couldn't defend herself at all. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Vex turned his full attention to the student, and his scarred features arranged themselves into an expression that made several students step back instinctively. Cadet Thornax, he said quietly. Are you familiar with the Battle of Kepler Station? Yes, sir. A decisive Imperial victory against the Helix Syndicate, one of our greatest tactical triumphs. And do you know who planned that victory? Thornax hesitated. The military council, sir? The military council provided support and resources, Commander Vex corrected. But the tactical plan that broke the Syndicate's defenses was designed by a single individual, a human. The same human whose 12-year-old daughter you just watched being tormented for the entertainment of her classmates. The room went silent. David Chen, Commander Vex continued, has forgotten more about warfare than most of us will ever learn. He has saved more lives, prevented more conflicts, and eliminated more threats to Imperial security than any 10 officers combined. And you think his daughter's inability to fight off a group of bullies proves that humans are weak? I didn't mean, Thornax stammered. What you meant, Commander Vex said coldly, is that you have confused physical violence with actual strength. Maya Chen is 12 years old and has been raised in peacetime by parents who hoped she would never need to know about the darker aspects of galactic politics. The fact that she can't defend herself against older, larger students doesn't prove human weakness. It proves human civilization. Meanwhile, in a completely different section of the Academy, the recording was being viewed by someone whose reaction would have far more immediate consequences than any student discussion. Principal Carrix was a Valdorian of advanced age, her crystalline structure bearing the deep, complex patterns that indicated both wisdom and authority among her species. She had run the Imperial Academy for 23 years, and in that time had dealt with incidents ranging from minor pranks to full-scale diplomatic crises between student populations from worlds that were technically at war with each other. But as she watched the recording of Maya being surrounded and humiliated, her crystalline form began to pulse with a deep red light that indicated genuine anger. Computer, she said, her voice carrying the resonant tones that came naturally to her species. Priority message to Imperial Security Command. Authorization Carrix Alpha 7. Authorization confirmed, Principal Carrix. Ready for message. This is Principal Carrix of the Imperial Academy Station. I need to speak with Commander David Chen immediately regarding a security incident involving his daughter. Priority level urgent. Message sent. Principal Carrix. Please note that Commander Chen is currently classified as unavailable due to operational deployment. Carrix's light shifted from red to a dangerous purple. Computer, escalate to Emergency Protocol 7. This message is to be delivered regardless of operational status. Emergency. Protocol 7 requires justification code. Justification. Threat to dependent of Special Operations personnel may compromise ongoing mission, effectiveness, and Imperial security. There was a pause. Then, Emergency Protocol 7 accepted. Message will be delivered within the hour. But Carrix wasn't finished. Her next call was to the Academy security chief, a massive arachnoid named Captain Skelk, whose 8 legs carried him through the corridors with surprising speed. Captain, Carrix said when he arrived in her office, I need you to review our surveillance records for the past month. Focus on any incidents involving Maya Chen and the students identified in this recording. Captain Skelk's multiple eyes examined the data file Carrix transmitted to him. Looking for patterns of harassment? Looking for evidence, Carrix corrected grimly. Because when Commander Chen receives my message and asks for a full report, I want to be able to tell him exactly how long this has been going on, how many students were involved, and what the Academy administration did or didn't do to prevent it. And if the report isn't favorable to us? Carrick's crystalline form pulsed with a light that Captain Skelk had learned to associate with his principal, making very serious decisions. Then we had better hope that David Chen is more interested in protecting his daughter's future at this academy than he is in seeking retribution for past failures. But even as Carrick's and her staff began their urgent investigation, the recording continued to spread beyond the Academy's internal networks. Within hours, it had reached the broader Imperial communication grid, where it began to attract attention from sources that the original bullies could never have imagined. On the industrial world of Drekmoros Prime, a bar full of off-duty military personnel fell silent as someone played the recording on the main viewing screen. These were hardened soldiers, veterans of conflicts across the galaxy, beings who had seen the worst that war could offer. But as they watched a small human child being systematically humiliated for the crime of existing, the mood in the bar became darker than anything the establishment had seen during wartime. "That's David Chen's kid," someone said quietly. "Yeah," replied another voice. "It is." And in that moment, without any official orders or coordinated planning, the news began to spread through military networks with the speed of wildfire. Not through official channels, those would come later, but through the informal communications that connected soldiers across the Empire. By morning, every military installation in 3 sectors would know that someone had made the mistake of targeting the daughter of the man who had saved more soldiers' lives than anyone could count. The Empire was vast, containing billions of beings across thousands of worlds, but some names carried weight that transcended normal bureaucratic channels. Some people had earned a level of respect that made hurting their families a very personal affront to everyone who wore the Imperial uniform. David Chen was one of those people, and somewhere in the dark reaches of space, in a location so classified that its existence was known to fewer than a dozen individuals, a priority message was being delivered to a man who had spent his career protecting the Empire from its enemies. A message that would inform him that his greatest enemies might not be external threats after all, but the prejudice and hatred that lived within the very institutions he had sworn to defend. The message reached David Chen 18 hours later, transmitted through communication channels so secure that their very existence was classified above the clearance level of most Imperial admirals. He was aboard a stealth reconnaissance vessel in the void reaches, 3 days into what was supposed to be a month-long mission to investigate reports of unknown alien technology. Commander Chen sat in the ship's communications bay, a small, unremarkable man in standard military fatigues, who could have passed for any off-duty technician in the Imperial fleet. His dark hair showed traces of gray at the temples, and his brown eyes behind simple reading glasses gave him the appearance of someone more suited to a desk job than active field operations. But as he watched the recording of his daughter's humiliation, those same brown eyes grew very, very cold, sir, ventured Lieutenant Torres, the communications officer who had delivered the message. "Do you need anything?" David Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching the screen where his 12-year-old daughter was pressed against a wall while 6 older students mocked her for being human. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft that Torres had to strain to hear it. "How long ago was this recorded?" "Approximately 19 hours, sir. It was transmitted to you as soon as we received the emergency protocol message from the Academy." 19 hours, Chen repeated thoughtfully. And according to the metadata, it had already been shared 47 times before the Academy administration became aware of it. "Yes, sir." Chen turned away from the screen and looked out the small viewport at the stars beyond. "Lieutenant, I need you to contact Captain Morrison and inform him that I'm returning to Imperial space immediately." "Sir." "The mission parameters specify that this operation is critical to—" "The mission parameters," Chen interrupted gently, "did not account for this situation. Please inform the captain that Special Operations Directive 12 is now in effect." Torres went pale. Directive 12 was the code for a personal crisis involving Special Operations personnel that took precedence over all other mission requirements. It was rarely invoked, and when it was, it usually meant that something had gone seriously wrong. "Understood, sir. How should I log the reason for mission termination?" "Family emergency," Chen said simply. But as Torres hurried away to make the necessary arrangements, Chen turned back to the recording and watched it again. And then again. Each viewing revealed new details, new insights into what his daughter had endured, the systematic nature of the harassment, the casual cruelty in the voices of her tormentors, the way they had used her species as a weapon against her, making her feel ashamed of being human. The complete lack of intervention from anyone in authority, and perhaps most telling of all, the practiced ease with which they had recorded the encounter, suggesting this was far from the first time they had engaged in this behavior. By the time the ship entered hyperspace for the journey back to Imperial space, David Chen had made several decisions that would reshape the lives of everyone involved. His first action was to contact someone he had hoped never to involve in his daughter's life. "Sarah," he said when the secure connection was established, "I need you to look into something for me." Colonel Sarah Voss appeared on the screen. Her auburn hair pulled back in the regulation style that marked her as Special Operations Division's Chief Intelligence Officer. They had worked together for 15 years, and she could read the subtle signs in his expression that meant serious trouble. "What do you need, David?" "I'm sending you a recording. I need a complete background analysis on every individual visible in the footage. Family histories, psychological profiles, academic records, social connections, political affiliations of their families, financial status, everything. How deep do you want me to go?" "Deep enough to understand how children from 6 different worlds developed identical prejudices against humans. Deep enough to determine whether this is isolated behavior or part of a broader pattern." Sarah's expression grew serious. "David, this is about Maya, isn't it?" "Yes." "Do you want me to also run a security assessment on the academy itself? Faculty backgrounds, administration protocols, previous incident reports?" "Do it all," Chen confirmed. "And Sarah?" "This is classified at the highest level. The results go only to me." "Understood. How long do I have?" "I'll be back at Imperial Command in 36 hours. I want everything ready for review when I arrive." After ending the call, Chen made his second decision. He opened a communication channel to a network that officially didn't exist, connecting him to assets throughout the Empire who answered only to Special Operations Division. The messages he sent were brief and coded, but their meaning was clear to those who received them. Someone had threatened the family of a Special Operations officer. Information was needed. Contingencies should be prepared. Within hours, surveillance was being quietly established around the academy. Background checks were being run not just on the students involved, but on their families, their teachers, their friends, and their social networks. Financial records were being analyzed, communication logs were being reviewed, and on 6 different worlds, the families of Maya's tormentors began to experience subtle signs that their lives were under intense scrutiny, even if they didn't yet understand why. Meanwhile, at the academy itself, the consequences were already beginning. Zix arrived at his morning classes to find that his instructors were treating him with unusual coldness. His grades on recent assignments, which had been adequate, were now being reviewed with heightened scrutiny. His access to certain academy facilities had been quietly restricted. Thyra discovered that her family's application for expanded trade rights with the Empire had been flagged for additional review. The process, which should have taken weeks, was now projected to take months. Forth found that his research project on atmospheric dynamics had been reassigned to another student without explanation. When he attempted to protest, he was told only that the project required more reliable personnel. None of them understood yet that these were just the beginning stages of a much larger response. They had assumed that bullying a weak human child would have no consequences. Beyond their immediate entertainment, they had failed to consider that some children have parents who specialize in consequences. And as David Chen's ship raced through hyperspace toward Imperial Command, carrying a man whose anger was colder and more dangerous than the vacuum of space itself, the 6 students who had thought themselves safe in their casual cruelty were about to learn exactly what it meant to threaten the family of someone whose job was protecting the Empire from its enemies. Because David Chen had spent his career learning that the most effective responses to threats weren't always violent. Sometimes they were much worse than that. Sometimes they were thorough. 2 weeks later, Maya walked through the same corridor where she had been cornered and humiliated. But everything had changed. Students moved aside respectfully as she passed, offering polite nods and even occasional smiles. The whispers that followed her now carried tones of awe rather than mockery. Where once she had been ignored or targeted, She was now treated with the careful courtesy normally reserved for visiting dignitaries. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been accomplished through violence or dramatic confrontations. Instead, it had come through the quiet, systematic application of consequences that reached far beyond the academy walls. Zix no longer attended the academy. His family's mining operation on Drakmaros Prime had been subjected to a routine imperial audit that uncovered significant safety violations and tax irregularities. The resulting fines and legal complications had forced them to withdraw their son from the expensive private education they could no longer afford. He was now enrolled in a basic vocational school, learning maintenance skills that would help his family rebuild their damaged business. Thyra's fate had been more complex. Investigation into her family's background had revealed connections to separatist political movements that advocated for Zeltharian independence from the Empire. While no illegal activities were uncovered, the scrutiny had been sufficient to bar her father from several government contracts. The family's political views were now a matter of public record, making their daughter's anti-human rhetoric appear as part of a broader pattern of species supremacism. Thyra remained at the academy, but her social standing had collapsed as other students distanced themselves from her family's controversial politics. Vorth's family faced different consequences entirely. The Newman Trade Consortium they belonged to had found their shipping licenses subjected to random intensive inspections that revealed numerous minor violations of imperial commerce regulations. Each violation required expensive corrective actions and legal reviews. The consortium had quietly transferred Vorth to a different academy on their homeworld, hoping to distance themselves from whatever had brought imperial attention to their operations. The other 3 students involved in the incident had experienced similar reversals. In each case, nothing done to them was illegal, improper, or even particularly harsh by imperial standards. They were simply experiencing the normal operations of imperial bureaucracy, applied with unusual thoroughness and attention to detail. But the changes at the academy went far beyond the punishment of 6 individual students. A principal, Carrick's, had received a visit from Imperial Education Authority inspectors who conducted the most comprehensive review in the Academy's history. The inspection had uncovered numerous policy gaps in areas related to student welfare, anti-discrimination procedures, and incident reporting requirements. While the Academy passed the inspection, the required improvements would take months to implement and would fundamentally change how the institution operated. New protocols now required immediate reporting of any harassment incidents to imperial authorities. Counseling programs had been expanded to address species-based prejudice. Faculty training now included modules on recognizing and preventing discrimination. The Academy's charter had been amended to explicitly state that species-based harassment was grounds for immediate expulsion. Most significantly, the Academy now hosted a small but permanent detachment of Imperial security, personnel whose presence served as a constant reminder that student behavior was being monitored by authorities far above the Academy administration. Maya had watched these changes unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Her father had returned from his mission and seemed exactly the same as always, quiet, gentle, helping with homework and making terrible jokes at dinner. But now she understood that his ordinary appearance was itself a kind of camouflage, concealing capabilities that most people couldn't imagine. "Dad," she had asked one evening as they worked together on a chemistry assignment, "did you really do all those things that Kale said you did?" David Chen had looked up from the molecular diagrams they were studying, his brown eyes serious behind his reading glasses. "Maya, there are things in this galaxy that are dangerous and complicated, and my job is to deal with them so that you don't have to. The specific details of what I do aren't important. What's important is that you understand you're safe, and that no one has the right to make you feel ashamed of who you are. But what about Zix and the others? What happened to them seems big, like more than just getting in trouble for being mean to me." Her father had been quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes when you investigate one problem, you discover other problems that were already there but hidden. The students who hurt you weren't just being randomly cruel. They had learned their attitudes from somewhere, and those attitudes were being reinforced by systems and policies that treated some imperial citizens as less important than others. So you fix the systems? "I brought the problems to the attention of people whose job it is to fix them," he had corrected gently. "The Empire is supposed to be a place where every citizen has equal protection and equal opportunity, regardless of what species they are or where they come from. When that principle breaks down, it threatens everyone's security." Maya had nodded slowly, beginning to understand that her personal experience had been treated as a symptom of something much larger. Now, as she made her way to her advanced physics class, she reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. The academy felt like a completely different place. Students were more careful about their behavior, more aware that their actions might have consequences beyond immediate social dynamics. But perhaps more importantly, the change wasn't limited to the academy. News of the incident and its aftermath had spread through imperial networks, carried by the same informal communication channels that had originally distributed the recording. Military families throughout the Empire had watched one of their own respond to an attack on his child with characteristic precision and thoroughness. The message had been clear. The Empire's protectors would not tolerate threats to their families, even when those threats came from within imperial society itself. On dozens of worlds, similar incidents of species-based harassment were being reported and investigated with new urgency. Educational institutions were reviewing their policies. Local governments were examining their own procedures for protecting minority populations. The Empire had always been officially committed to equality among its diverse species, but that commitment had sometimes been theoretical rather than practical. Now, thanks to one small girl's humiliation and her father's response, those theoretical commitments were being transformed into real protections backed by real consequences. Maya entered her physics classroom and took her usual seat near the front. As she opened her datapad and prepared for the lesson, she noticed that several of her classmates nodded respectfully in her direction. Not out of fear, but out of a new understanding of who she was and what she represented. She was no longer just Maya Chen, the quiet human girl who struggled with some of the advanced concepts. She was Maya Chen, daughter of David Chen, living proof that humans belonged in the Empire not as charity cases or pets, but as full citizens whose families would be protected with the same fierce dedication that had made the Empire strong. And in that transformation, something fundamental had shifted in the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be human in the vast community of Imperial space. The students who had once mocked humanity's apparent weakness had learned that true strength wasn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes it was hidden behind ordinary appearances and gentle smiles, waiting patiently until someone threatened the things that mattered most. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemies were the ones who looked like harmless fathers, helping their daughters with homework, and sometimes, the greatest victories were won not through force but through the quiet, systematic application of justice that reminded everyone that the Empire's laws applied equally to all its citizens, regardless of species, status, or the perceived powerlessness of their victims. Maya smiled as her physics instructor began the day's lesson on quantum mechanics. She still struggled with some of the concepts, but she no longer felt ashamed of asking questions when she didn't understand something. After all, she was exactly where she belonged.